Morning, everybody. As everyone's joining us this morning and it starts logging in, would you please share the answer to our question in your LEA group? For those of you who are attending without an LEA group, and we do know we have some singletons out there, please be prepared to share this question in our first breakout session. We'll start, I'm going to give you a few housekeeping things right now. First of all, at designated times throughout this webinar, the LEA singletons are going to be asked to join a breakout group to discuss the information that we're sharing. If you are, not everybody was able to register, and so if you're sitting in a room with other people from your office and you're like, oh no, we have extra people, just don't join a breakout room and discuss it. We have set up 7 breakout rooms, and we have 2 additional breakout rooms specifically for our district singletons. Everyone else is pretty much a charter school, and because districts sometimes have different levels of support than our charter schools do, so we are assigning them to breakout rooms together. And then all the charter school singletons are also going to be asked to join together as well. So remember, you don't join a breakout group if you're meeting at your location with a group of people, because you're going to be discussing the information live at your location. And our big question that we're going to ask everyone is, what was the first album you purchased with your own money? And we understand that when you use the term album, we could be talking about a record or a CD or the first thing you downloaded, any of those things, depending on your age. We said album because I should have said record because I'm that old. So if you would go ahead and start talking about what's the first album you purchased with your own money, and just be pretty, and talk about that for a second. Another question that's going to come up really quickly is sorry, I'm not going to show another question that's going to come up really quickly is, are we going to share the slide deck? And we aren't today. We're going to share it right after the meeting. We will be sharing these slides with you. We'll be sending them to everyone who registered in Midas. And also we'll be connecting them to our next AD, our assessment director memo. And as soon as Emily can get the recording uploaded, we will also be sharing this recording on our YouTube channel. So everyone will have access to the information as you have it, but that's the main thing. And you don't have to type your answer in the chat. For those of you who are looking, you don't have to type your answer in the chat. Share it with the people that you're talking to in your meeting, and then just be prepared that when we go into our first breakout, that people are going to ask you. You're also going to notice that we answered this question, and some of the answers may surprise you, some of them won't. It's been kind of a fun question that we've been asking, and as everyone's been reviewing their slide deck, we're learning a little bit more about each other than we thought. So if anyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. And let's talk about what we're going to do today. Basically, our plan today is to increase communication about assessment-related tasks and calendar items and information within all of the LEAs. We recognize that this is a heavy lift for our assessment directors. We answer lots and lots and lots of questions for everyone, which we love to do. Never apologize for asking, oh, we're sorry to bother you, because that's what they pay us for. But we wanted to give you a chance to, as an LEA staff, to identify, review, discuss, and plan all kinds of assessment-related tasks. We want to improve our communication between USBE assessment staff and LEAs so that you know who it is to reach out. We know that everyone is really busy, and sometimes it's really hard to know who is it I'm supposed to reach out to, and so you just reach out to the name that you know, and sometimes you're in a big hurry and we have to forward that information to someone else. So we're hoping to provide you with some tools to allow you to know who it is you need to communicate with. And we know today that we have lots of different people from different roles. There's a reason why we wanted our curriculum directors and our assessment directors and our special education directors and our literacy directors and our ALS directors. And anybody else who decided to join as well, you're all welcome. We just wanted to make sure that we could look and recognize and organize all kinds of assessment-related tasks within the LEA. And of course, some of this is to provide some guidance and information on assessment laws and policies, administration, and assessment literacy. We're trying to build assessment literacy across the state. One of the things you're going to see today is you're going to be looking at calendars and communication plans. You're going to be updating those. You're going to know who to contact. You're going to be knowing one of the big successes will be that all the assessment-related tasks will be completed within all the required deadlines. Sometimes people aren't aware of them, and it catches them off guard. And we really want you to be successful because remember, this is really all about student learning. And then, of course, who you need to communicate and collaborate with within your LEA. So we're going to start with Darren Nilsson. And Darren, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, Kim. Since you're up, I'll let you just keep sharing. Is that okay?
Oh, that's just fine.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be with all of you here today. This album is my first one that I purchased. It might surprise some of you. It surprises me a little bit. I do love 80s rock. That's the majority of my playlist on my running playlist, and so that part. Many of the songs that I saw going into the chat are songs also that take me back in time and I get a lot of enjoyment out of. But I'm really grateful that you've chosen to take time today to join us, and I have a high level of confidence that at the end of the time together today that there'll be a feeling of appreciation on your part as well, and you'll have been able to strengthen the communications plans within your LEAs. All right, Kim, let's go to the next slide, please. Some of you were with us I believe it was in 2019. We held a formative assessment summit. It was formatted much the way today's meeting is, where we asked leadership teams from LEAs to join us. It was held up at the University of Utah's campus. I don't remember the count. We had a full conference room full of individuals, and again, I expect many of you were there. This slide and the next slide that I'm going to share comes from that presentation. And these are two slides that I've hung on to from that time because they do a good job of helping us conceptualize the concept of a balanced assessment system. Unfortunately, a lot of times when we use the term assessment, it gets, at least in my world and in my staff's world, it gets focused around this bucket of large-scale accountability assessments, aka RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, even ACT in our state. And we forget that assessment is an essential part of the learning cycle. So this slide again breaks these out into 4 quadrants, which again I found this to be very helpful in communicating to a variety of audiences this concept of a balanced assessment system and the role that assessment plays in learning and providing feedback, which is essential for our students and our teachers. So let's go to the next slide. So I want to highlight the groups, and I think one more click might put red circles on there. Yeah, so 4 more clicks. Just to highlight the groups that these assessment buckets generally are designed to serve. So when I hear on a national scale right now, we hear states talking about a term called through-year assessments. And I think there's 11 to 12 states right now that are moving to, in some form or fashion, to what they call through-year assessments, where they're trying to take their large-scale accountability assessment systems and move them into a format that they're more valuable for teachers, or to cross-connect them with the classroom formative assessments. My personal opinion is that is not a good path to go down, that once an assessment is associated with accountability, it loses any type of formative nature that it has and interferes with that. So again, I hope in your own communities, when you get these slides, you'll consider referencing these as you talk to community members, educators that you might have, and others about the different roles that each type of assessment plays. All right, let's go to the next slide, which is just to explain. This is what our statutory code around statewide assessments is. And remember, statewide assessments are, in this context, are the large-scale accountability assessments that were in the upper right-hand quadrant of the previous slides. So you'll see here there's really 3 main purposes that the legislature has decided that assessments are important and that they provide significant funding to allow those assessments to go forward. The effectiveness of schools and districts, to provide additional tool to plan, measure, and evaluate the effectiveness of programs. And I'm going to pause there for a minute because it specifically calls out programs. So as we talk about statewide assessments, And when people say, well, this particular assessment, X, Y, or Z, doesn't provide me timely information to inform actions that I'm going to take with my students, if we look at the code would say that's not the purpose of that particular assessment, that it's to help evaluate the effectiveness of programs, which could include curriculum that you might have, might include programs that the legislature puts in place outside of assessment, and they want an accountability measure to determine whether that program was actually able to realize the promises that were made in the beginning, and so forth. And then finally, and not leastly, to recognize excellence that's occurring in our schools, and then also to identify need. And the reason for the identify need is to take additional resources and allocate those to the places that need them the most. We've seen that over time with the turnaround program. Now we have Elevate, Springboard, and even the federal level. Those are the funds that come through the CSI Title I designations that provide additional funding for schools to help them address whatever needs they have to help them be able to get to a point of more academic success in their environment. So again, I share this just because from a contextual standpoint, as we begin talking about assessment today, and we'll go through a variety of assessments to remember that part of our conversation we'll be talking about large-scale accountability assessments. We'll also talk about classroom formative assessment practices and then interim and benchmarks as well. And just to visualize, each of those has a different purpose, and they're designed to serve the needs of different audiences. The next slide is going to illustrate the number of tests that we have in the state of Utah and the code, either federal or state, that requires that assessment. So there's not an assessment system that the State Board of Education provides. It's not required and funded, or at least required through the Utah legislature. And I share this slide oftentimes with our Board of Education to help them understand the quiver full of tools that are available through our State Board of Education and their partnership with the Utah legislature. Some of these assessments are required. Some of them are designed for very specific groups of students, and each of them has a purpose that they are designed to play and needs that they're supposed to address. We'll provide the slides, the question in the chat. The slides will be provided at the conclusion of the meeting. For those of you who registered for the Zoom, we've got now a list of your email addresses, and we'll share the slides that way. This slide I want to highlight, as we showed from the previous slide, all the different assessment tools that are provided. This slide is designed to show that there's a number of assessment tools that our State Board of Education, the state legislature provide, that are designed to be used in a formative nature of some kind or another. None of these that you see on this, there was a legislative change a year ago, so Acadian's progress monitoring now has some conditions where it's required, depending on the student's score on their benchmark. But the rest of these assessments are designed as optional tools that educators can use in their settings. Many teachers across the state of Utah utilize these tools. In fact, we're working on a study right now of the RISE benchmark use. We've surpassed over 1 million benchmark testing events that occurred last year. We're in the process of studying their use. The purpose of that, again, is to be able to share with you, your educational leadership teams, the conditions in which these benchmark assessments are being used and the influence that they might be having on students' academic achievement as measured by some of the large-scale statewide assessments designed for monitoring program effectiveness. So before I turn the time over to Kim, I do need to take just a moment and thank my staff who've put together this event that we have today, who've prepared content and opportunities for your leadership teams to engage one with another. There's been a lot of work done here, and I'm grateful that you'll get a chance to meet each of the members of our assessment team, or many of the members of our assessment team, through this presentation. And then just again encourage you to continue to be engaged with each other throughout the day. There can be lots of opportunities for competing demands on your time and priorities. And I hope that you'll be able to maintain your focus with each other as we talk about these resources that are designed to support academic achievement for our students, which is a shared goal that all of us have. So thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to talk today. This is one of your first tasks that you guys are going to be doing today. And just to clarify, because some people came in later, remember, if you are sitting in a room in your building somewhere with a group of people, you do not have to join a breakout session. You are a breakout session. It's just in person. If you are a singleton out there, we are going to set up breakout rooms when Emily will send, you'll be able to choose out of 7 breakout rooms if you're a charter school. If you're a district, there are, you have been assigned, and you're a singleton, you've been assigned to 2 breakout rooms if you are by yourself. If you aren't by yourself and somebody just didn't register in Midas or we didn't know, feel free to just talk in your buildings. Nobody has to join a breakout session if you are with someone else. It's only if you're by yourself, so that you can get the chat done, so that you can get the task done together. And as you can see, I have a deep and abiding love for John Denver. I always think about him, especially on October 12th. 1997 is when he died. It was my first year of teaching. It's a very powerful memory for me, but it was the first album I ever bought, so I still love him. All right, so Amy doesn't have to jump off mute and introduce herself, but since we're not in person all of that often, I thought you might want to see Amy, the person who you communicate with the most, and that is Amy Magruder, and her first album was Purple Rain by Prince. One of the links that are in this thing, we do have a link that lists every year all of our assessment director meetings. And every single week, except the weeks when we have assessment director meetings, a memo will come to your email box if you are on our listserv every Tuesday afternoon. Occasionally, something is happening and we send them out Wednesday morning. But almost all the time, you will get a weekly assessment director meeting memo every Tuesday afternoon. And if you are interested in getting on our listserv, you just need to email Amy. And Amy will be the person that will get you on that list, and she will go ahead and send that. If you are new and you haven't been getting information about assessment director meetings or memos, and you know in your person in your staff that needs that information, please feel free to go ahead and reach out to us, and we are happy to put you on our list, because we don't believe you can communicate any more than we already do. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to give you as a task is we want you to review the actual Assessment Director Resource Guide. And it's titled Assessment Director Resource Guide because the main people that look at this are assessment directors. However, we always get tons of email from people asking us what legislation it is that controls, that monitors the testing ethics policy, or what is the legislation exactly that that provides the information about state testing? When are the dates? The number one question we get all the time is, when are the tests being given? When is the window? When am I supposed to, what am I supposed to do? And so we want to give you a chance to actually look at this resource guide in your groups, okay? So Emily, go ahead and get the breakout rooms ready. And so what you're going to be doing, and Amy is going to copy the Assessment Director Resource Guide link into the chat. For those of you who are familiar with the assessment, with the USBE webpage, you can also access it, and I'll go back 2 slides. If you go to the Assessment and Accountability page on our USBE website, you'll find it under Resources. But we're going to just type it into the chat for you so that you can do this. And so what you're going to be doing, and you're going to have about 5 minutes to review this. So this is one of those give one, get one situations. So within your group, decide who is going to look at what. So you may want to assign somebody to look at Apple tests. You may want to have somebody look at some of the other, any of the other assessments. And here are the tasks that we would like you to do. Sorry, I just clicked that open. The rules that guide statewide assessments. Any surprises that you find? How's this information connected to your daily work? We understand that not everybody in here has assessment as their primary job. But one of the things you may want to be aware of is that everybody needs to be communicating with the teachers, the educators, the staff. All of that information needs to get passed down, including When are the reports due? When am I supposed to do some of those things? And it depends on your role. And for some people, and we do have charter schools where they are all the things. So please make sure you look at that. So you're going to scan the list of assessments and note and add any essential dates to your calendars. So open them up. Pay particular attention to when the results are available. And here's a big task. Determine who's responsible for sharing student data results within your LEA, from leadership to the classroom teachers all the way down to parents. Because by law, once a statewide assessment, everybody is finished with their statewide assessments, you have to provide that information within 3 weeks. So how is that happening? Now, if you're going to be in a breakout session group, we understand that you're not working with people that you normally work with. So what I'd like you to do is still go ahead and look, complete the same tasks, and talk about this with other LEAs. Because if you're having some strength, you have some strengths that you want to share, or you have a struggle, these people are the people that you can talk to. They understand what you're doing. So go ahead and join your breakout rooms. I'm going to set a timer for about 5 minutes. If we need a little bit more time, we're going to add some time at the end of this meeting for everyone to spend time completing any tasks that they didn't finish. So we've added time at the end so that we can move through. The number one thing is be prepared to update your calendars and your task lists as we go through this webinar, so don't close anything off. So I'm just setting a timer now. Hopefully everyone's in their breakout rooms. USBE assessment people, you don't have to join in a breakout room unless you would like to. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next task. I would just, if you can, we're going to now do something very similar. We are going to now look at the assessment task calendar. And this is something that the systems team created about 2 or 3 years ago. I'm kind of losing track of time, where we actually sat down and made a list by month of all of the different tasks that have to be accomplished on a high level for all of the statewide assessments and the assessments that the assessment and accountability section is in charge of. So what we're going to have you do is actually review this task calendar together. And again, it's found on the same exact page on the website under Assessment Director Resources. And we will put this link into the chat. And we're going to have you kind of go through and review the task list for each month. One thing you may do, if you're thinking about it, you may want to focus more on what's happening between now and December, and then as a group, and then maybe also look at what happens in the winter and then in the spring. Make sure that you look at that. You may want to even print it out or highlight who the person in your LEA is responsible for all the different listed tasks. And the reason why this is really individualized is when we first provided this to everyone, we were asked by multiple people, well, this seems like our tech guys do this, or this seems like someone else does that. And part of that is because every single LEA is so individualized on some of this. It would be important for you to know who is actually supposed to do this, so that you know. You may want to also look at the task and decide how it impacts your own daily work. Is there something that you're thinking, oh, wait, I need to remind our teachers about this that I work with on a daily basis, and make sure that they're aware. Think about those procedures that you have in place already to ensure that the staff know who and when and what and how to complete the tasks, and scan each month and note those dates on your calendar. And when we get to the section about accommodations, that becomes very important, especially for those LEAs who are administering the ACT, AP and IB tests, because there are strict deadlines about, applying for accommodations. So, and in your breakout session groups, share the wealth, complete the same tasks. Talk about this with other LEAs, particularly some of our charters, where when we ask who does what, some of them it is you do all the things. So you may be lucky and be able to talk to somebody else who does all the things and share some tips. And again, be prepared to update your task list as the webinar progresses. So again, if you're working with people in a room in your LEA, you don't have to join a breakout session. If you are alone, we're going to assign you to a breakout group. or Emily's just going to release them. We've deleted our district-specific ones, and then hopefully you can be together. We specifically ask everyone to try to get it together in a room. So we're sorry about the delay. So any questions? If you have any, go ahead and come off mute. The link for the task calendar will be in the chat. It should be in the chat right now. It's also on the USBE website under Assessment and Accountability. I'll click back a slide so you can see where that is. I'm assuming Amy's put it in the chat. I don't want to click on the chat and mess up the slide really quick, but here it is. Yep, Amy has put that link in the chat, so feel free to do that. And go ahead and assign everybody to breakout rooms, or if you're in your LEA groups, go ahead and start chatting. You're going to have about 5 minutes to work on this as well.
And I just want to make sure, Kim and others, that there's no audio being played right now. I can't hear anything.
Yeah, we know. We're just waiting for everybody to come back in. So we're just about to start with Sydney. So
okay, thank you for your patience with me.
I'm going to stop sharing, Sydney. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can. I wanted to give people a chance to come back because we don't have a timer hooked up so that people can see it who are just meeting in groups. And so I'm trying to do a verbal, announcement when there's less than a minute. So we're trying to get that going. So I'm getting ready to do that. So Sydney, I'm going to stop sharing if you're ready. And we're going to go, hopefully you found some of that information. Like we said, we will give you some time at the end of this presentation as well to go ahead and continue to discuss. And it may be a conversation that you guys want to schedule another meeting within your LEAs to start talking about it, because sometimes the awareness is half of the game. So Sydney, you're up.
Thank you. Let me share my screen, and then I'm going to make sure I put this on. And present from here. Whoops, let me swap. There we go. Okay, you guys are seeing the slide deck now, right?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So I'm excited to introduce my team. My name is Sydney Carter. I'm the Assessment Development Coordinator. My first album was Boyz II Men 2. Used all my babysitting money to buy that album. You see on the screen, we also have Rebecca Hatch. She's the Executive Secretary for our team. And so Rebecca helps with all of our development work and with assessment to achievement that we work on. This is the test development team, so I won't ask them to come off of mute or anything to introduce themselves. You can see the members of our team here and their specific areas that they focus on, the specific assessments as well as their amazing music choices. So we're going to walk through some of the test development staff or resources that we have and the work that we do, and hope you have a little bit of an introduction to who you can communicate with if you have questions. So you see images here. On the next page, we have links. So when you get the slide deck, you'll have links to email addresses there, as well as the specific person that you would be communicating with if you had questions. I will note, you can see here, we do have one open position. Whitney Grant was our secondary math assessment specialist, and she actually is moving to Arkansas and building a house there. So we actually have an open position for secondary math, hoping that job will be posted probably early next week. So if you know of anybody that's interested in joining the assessment staff or that's interested in secondary math, we would love to hear from you. So let us know if you have people that are interested. This is the test development process. We wanted to just take a moment to walk through what happens when we write items or questions for our state summative assessments. That would be for RISE or for Utah Aspire Plus. I know this image is fairly small, so we broke it down into a couple of different slides. But the thing that the test development team works on mainly is designing and developing questions or items for our state summative assessments. And this starts with language arts with a passage selection, where we have our vendor that selects different passages that may be potential for us to use within language arts, the reading assessments. And then we wanted to highlight the work that many steps along the way, we bring in educators from across Utah to provide feedback and to give us their expertise in what should be included on our state summative assessments. So Utah educators are included on this review passage workshop that we hold each year. We bring in teachers from across the state or assessment people or like literacy coaches or math coaches, educators that are expertise in the subject area that they're reviewing. And we ask them to provide feedback on the passages that have been selected, if they are appropriate for students at that grade level, if there are things that we need to edit out of the passage or edit to include in the passage. And they just give us feedback about what those passages or passage sets should be. And then we move into the actual writing of the questions that will be included on the assessments. So we actually just held these item writing workshops earlier this year. Many of you have had people that have participated in these workshops in the past, but we bring in teachers from across the state to write the actual questions that are on RISE or Utah Aspire Plus. So educators come in, they write the questions, they align them to standards, they determine the DOK level that they feel like that item should be listed as. And then after we have teachers come in and write questions, a few weeks or months later, we have a different set of educators come in and review those questions. We actually just held these meetings yesterday and Tuesday, where we had teachers from across the state come in to review questions that were written earlier this year and review those questions for alignment to standards to make sure there's one correct answer and that the answer we've selected is the correct answer. We ask teachers to review the items for clarity and ensure that they make sense for students responding to those questions. And then we also hold another review that's called the item fairness or bias and sensitivity reviews. Those are also reviewed by Utah educators or Utah citizens, people that are community members that represent the diverse population of students that we have in Utah. And they review those items not for the alignment to content, but really for bias or fairness issues that we may not have noticed. So we bring in people from different communities to review the questions that we'll put on the test. And then finally, we have a legislated parent review where we have 5 parents that are nominated from the Senate, 5 from the House, and 5 from our State Board of Education that review any of our newly written questions for appropriateness and for being able to be on our tests for students in Utah. So we follow through this item development process with every question that we write. It's a fairly involved and expensive process, but we really value the input of having teachers from Utah and people from Utah reviewing and editing and writing all of the questions that are being put in front of students. After any question that gets through all of that process, it goes into our post-development process where then we move those and those questions or items get put in front of students on the RISE or Utah Aspire Plus summative assessments. They're field tested by the students, which means that they are seen by students, but they're not part of what is scored for those students. And after we field test the questions, we move into a meeting that's called the rubric validation. Again, we bring in Utah educators and we take a look at how did students actually respond to our field test questions. So the educators who wrote and reviewed the items put in the rubric what they thought would be the correct answers and the things that they felt like should be scored correctly for students. And then from all of us who have been teachers in the past, we know that students always surprise us. And oftentimes we, as scoring papers, we would see something, a student had written something that we had not thought of as being a correct response, but should actually be included. So that's why we hold these rubric validation meetings for any of our like drag and drop items or our equation editor items in math, things that students are not just our multiple choice questions. So we have Utah educators review actual student responses and say, no, that's not a correct answer, or wait a second, yeah, that actually is correct. We need to add that to our rubric as scoring correctly for the students. So we hold that rubric validation meeting. And then after that, we hold a data review meeting. At the data review meeting, we take a look at how the actual item performed. And is it telling us what we expect it to tell us? We take a look at different groups of students. So we take a look at female students versus male students, or our multilanguage learning students versus our English-only students. We take a look at the different populations of groups of students in Utah and different ethnic diversity students in Utah compared to other groups, and did the questions have an unintended bias that comes out when we actually show them to students. So at that data review, again, we bring in Utah educators to help us take a look at, is this item telling us what we need it to tell us, or is this something that is inherently wrong with the item and then it does not move forward after that? After the first operational year of an assessment, the next step would be to hold a standard setting. So again, when we have standard setting or standards validation, we bring in Utah educators to review and determine where those cut points should be. Where should that cutoff be between a level 1 and a level 2 student for proficiency? So we set those standards or validate the standards that were already set. Our plan for new ELA standards, this is a segue into upcoming slides, is that we'll have a new ELA assessment in spring of 2025. So then we'll hold either a standard setting or standards validation after that first administration of that new ELA assessment. And anything that makes it through all of those reviews becomes operational, and that's part of our operational bank and can be used for students in future administrations. So we wanted to highlight a couple of our upcoming meetings. If you have people that you want to be involved, we're continually looking for new educators to participate with us. We have returning people that come back over and over because they find it really, really helpful professional learning and to be involved in this process. But we're always looking to invite more people and include more people in our meetings. So we have a few upcoming meetings. They're listed here. I want to highlight the one that we have next week, our October 2nd and 3rd RISE ELA and Math Fairness Review. I think we're still looking for 1 or 2 more people. So if you know of anybody, we sent out a message yesterday in the AD memo, but if you know of anybody in your LEA that is part of one of the diverse populations of people in Utah, or that would come from that one of those groups that would be interested in participating in that fairness review. It's virtual. We'll pay them to attend. It doesn't need to be an educator. It can be a community member. So I think we're still looking for 1 or 2 more people for that meeting if you know of people. The other meetings coming up, I think some of them are already filled, but we're always flexible and looking for waitlist people. So if you have people that are interested in ELA or science, our upcoming meetings, they can reach out to the previous slides, Megan or Scott or Jared for those meetings, or if you have people that are interested in participating or for being aware of future meetings. We're always looking for, like I said, new people to be involved. We wanted to jump into highlight, many of you are probably aware, most of you are aware, that we had new English language arts standards approved by our board in April. We're going to talk about the timeline for assessing these new standards and how you can share that timeline with the people in your LEA if you've not already. And then we'll talk about communication and how do we communicate these changes with your colleagues and people on your team. We have the new standards here. I don't know that we have time today to go through and actually review the new standards, but if you are, probably our literacy directors are mostly aware, but if others are also looking to dive into the new ELA standards, you can find the link here. I wanted to talk a little bit about our timeline of implementation of the new ELA standards. So like you can see here, I think I said April earlier, but in May of 23, the ELA standards were approved, and we had teachers, the item writers or the standards writers, excuse me, come in to create core guides for the first time for the ELA standards. We have not had those previously, so we're excited to have those. We just had those out for public comment. I think the public comment has just finished. So those ELA core guides should be being published fairly soon. This fall, some of those meetings you saw that were listed earlier, we're having an alignment meeting. We had one for RISE on Monday. We're having the Utah Spire Plus one in a couple of weeks. So we bring in educator committees to review our current item banks, where we take a look at all of the items that we have in our item bank currently that fall with the ELA standards, and ask educators to come in and review those items for alignment to the new standards. Anything that does not align, we're no longer using in our bank. Anything that had partial alignment, we'll see if we need to refill test or edit those. Anything that has full alignment, we'll be able to move over. Anything that we're looking at that we think, okay, here's where it was aligned to, and this is actually a new alignment. The standard makes a little bit more sense now. We held that meeting for RISE on Monday, like I said, and Utah Aspire Plus is coming up in a couple of weeks. So if you have high school literacy people that would like to be involved in that, I think the meeting is full, but we're always looking for wait list people for that meeting. Coming up this winter, we'll be holding Blueprint and PLD, which is Performance or Proficiency Level Descriptor meetings for both RISE and Utah Aspire Plus, where again, we'll bring in educator committees to help us look at the blueprints and approve them for what we think should be included and assessed on RISE and Utah Aspire Plus, as well as determining what those descriptions should be for each of the students at each of those performance levels. So what would a level 1 student look like on the assessment? What would they know and be able to do? Following that, we'll move into item development meetings. So we're going to be taking a look at where we have gaps. After that alignment meeting where we realign our bank to the new standards, anywhere where we see we're missing or have new standards that we need to write to, or have some gaps that we've lost a bunch of items and we need to fill those items, we'll be writing new questions. So this spring, summer, and fall of 2024, we'll be holding a lot of item development meetings. So we'll need people to write items, to review the items for bias and sensitivity, and then also for content. And then our parent committee will review any of those new items as well. So again, we have lots of opportunities for educators to be involved in the design and development for the new ELA standards. Following that, the timeline is that we will administer the new assessments in the spring of 2025. So new standards were approved. Teachers have this year, the 23-24 school year, to start to implement and to teach those new standards, but the spring of 24 test will still remain the same RISE and Utah Aspire Plus tests that we've had for the last several years. The blueprints won't change. We'll have the same assessments. They'll be testing the previous ELA standards this spring in 24. All of this new development and new test design of the assessment will be administered in spring of 25. So just a heads up, for the spring of 25, we'll be having the new assessment, and then we'll also continue to have some new meetings for item development in that summer of 2025, where we'll have those rubric validations or data review meetings. And then finally, in the fall of 2025 is when we're going to be having either a standard setting or standards validation meeting, depending on how much change of the assessment, and we'll keep everybody up to date of that. But we'll either set new standards or validate the cuts of where the previous standards were. So then after that, if we set new cuts, we have to have those approved by our state school board. And then after those are approved, then we can do a final scoring. The timeline for the other assessments, the other content areas, should not affect their immediate scoring in the spring of 25. It'll just be the ELA test in RISE and the reading test, reading possibly English, depending on how the design of our test works out with Utah Aspire Plus. But the automatic scoring would be delayed depending on how long that standard setting or validation meeting takes to get those approved and scored, and then to be approved by the board. So there may be a delay with the scoring with the ELA tests for the spring of 25, but that should not impact the immediate scores for the other content areas in that year. Okay, that was kind of a quick look at those assessment timelines, as well as what we're planning with the new ELA assessment. If you have questions, please reach out to myself or anyone on my team. We're happy to answer those questions. One of the things that we created, because the thing that we see a lot and we get a lot of questions about, is not necessarily having the information that we share being passed along to others. So on this page, there's a link that Amy will put in the chat for this template that is really similar to the task list that you saw just recently, where you had specific tasks. This is actually a template for you that shows each of the assessments, who you can communicate with at USBE and their email that you would communicate with depending on which assessment. And then there's a space in the template for you to fill in who in your LEA should you communicate with when you hear information about that assessment. So that's a place for you to start filling in who's that person or those people that you should be communicating with and passing that information to. When you see in the AD memo or when you hear information from us, there's a chance for you to fill that template in. Kim, I'm not sure of timing, if we have time for people to take a minute to fill that in now, or if we want to move on and let them fill that in as we're moving through the slides.
I think we can probably have fill it in as they're moving through the slide,
Okay.
because they share it to Google Docs so people can see it. So
Yeah.
Great idea.
Excellent. So then Amy will post that in the slide. It will force you to copy the template as soon as you open it up. So there'll be a forced copy, and then you can have that document for yourself. But again, if you have questions, when you get this slide deck, all of my email and then anyone on my team, our emails are hyperlinked in there, and we appreciate and value your communication and questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.
Go ahead and click the next slide. I think it's Maureen's turn.
Okay, and Maureen, do you want me to share, or do you want to share the slides yourself?
I can take over presenting.
Okay.
I can
All
show
right,
my
I'll
screen.
stop sharing then.
Hi, everybody, I'm Maureen Rushing. I'm the assessment data specialist. I deal mostly with rostering. My first album, Psychedelic Furs, Forever Now. Luckily, I had 4 older brothers and sisters. They took care of a lot of purchasing of music as I was growing up, but about mid-'80s, I had to take over buying my own music. Psychedelic Furs. I highly recommend. All right, so we have just a quick overview of how students are rostered for assessments. They can be rostered by the grade they're in. So Utah Aspire Plus, 9th and 10th graders roster for that. They can be rostered by the courses they are enrolled in. That would be Acadians, Apple, Rise. They all rostered by the courses students are enrolled in. You can be rostered for a test depending on your 1% status. That's going to be your DLM tests. If you roster for DLM tests, you do not roster for anything else. And finally, you could be rostered for tests according to your EL status, your fluency. That would be our LEA assessment. Next slide. So as I just said, our course-based assessments are Acadians, Apple, Rise, Utah Core, Standards, Benchmarks. They are all rostered based on. Your student has to be actively enrolled in the correct grade for your assessment. They have to be actively enrolled in an eligible course, and they need to be without UTREX errors. Next slide. So, oops, we're a little bit out of order. I was planning on, we can go back to that, tiebreakers, because my main subject that I was going to talk about for a little bit is tiebreakers. Why a student will roster with one teacher over another teacher, why a student will roster at one school over another school if they are enrolled in multiple schools. So we have 2 sets of rules depending on if it's a grade-based assessment or a course-based assessment. You can find those rules in the assessment student rostering manual, and I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat right now. The course-based assessments are going to be on page 10 of the manual. The grade-based assessments are going to be on page 9. Basically, you can go through this list and predict what test, what class is going to roster a student. So we can go next slide. So if I have a student that's enrolled in with this schedule, I have a homeroom, reading, math, science, I can look at the courses they're enrolled in and predict which course they're going to roster with. We have core code lists. There's a link in this presentation to those. And we can look and we can see homeroom course is rostered slightly. Sorry, I think my slides are a little bit out of order, but yes, let's click one more time next. I'm sorry. So if we have a student that's enrolled in this course, grade 6 Spanish DI with this core code, we'll know that click next, please. They're going to rise with this core code for ELA, math, and science, and they're going to roster for their APPLE test. A good rule of thumb is if a student is in a course with a core code that is just grade level, grade 6 Spanish, grade 6 homeroom, those are going to roster you for all the RISE tests, ELA, math, and science. If you see a student in a course that is subject specific, grade 6 ELA, grade 6 math, that's going to roster a student for RISE with just that subject. So next slide, or we could have gone back. All right, so we have this student who is enrolled in a homeroom course, a reading specific course. He's a smarty pants. He is enrolled in math grade 6, and he is enrolled in science grade 4. We know that the math course, he's going to roster for that one. I'm going to click next. He's going to roster for that ELA course. Next, he's going to roster for his science course. Next, he's also going to roster for 4th grade math because he's enrolled in that homeroom course, which rosters you for all tests in RISE. This is a common issue that happens. You're going to have to put in a participation code most likely for that 4th grade math class because the student's going to be taking the 6th grade math class. Next slide. So our grade-based assessments, the only thing you need to be is enrolled in a school in 9th or 10th grade and without UTREX errors. If that happens, you are rostered for Utah Aspire Plus. Next slide. So even if I'm enrolled in a school and I'm only taking drill team, next slide, I'm going to be rostered for Utah Aspire Plus. Drill team, choir, driver's ed, you're going to be rostered for Utah Aspire Plus. Next slide. So let's say we have a student that's enrolled at a brick and mortar school in 9th grade. They also attend another school where they have a full slate, language arts, science, math, looks good. All things being equal, if they're both marked as school of record, both have the same membership days, both entry dates. We've gone through that list of tiebreakers that I was speaking of earlier. They will roster at, next slide, the brick and mortar school because that is on that tiebreaker list. If you look down that list, brick and mortar school takes priority over an SOEP school, and that is where they will roster. So if you ever have questions, where is the student rostering? Check out those tiebreaker rules. They are very helpful in determining why these things happen. So what do you do if a student that you believe is supposed to be rostering with you is rostered in another school and you need to sort it out? They're rostered in 2 places. What do you do? Next slide. This is going to be one of our topics of discussion in your breakout groups. Do you have a procedure for what to do when a student is enrolled in 2 schools and isn't rostering with you? Do you have a procedure when another district contacts you about the same issue? Who do they talk to? Who do you talk to? How do you work that out? Also, who assigns the core codes to your courses for those course-based assessments? Who can change that? If you need to discuss this with someone, who are you going to talk to in your district? What about if they have UTREX errors and they aren't rostering at all? Who in your district takes care of that? Who can check for you if you don't have access to the data gateway? Who can check for you to see if there's a fatal error on a student? And do they share that out? Can they share it with you? If you are interested in seeing the fatal errors, but you don't have that access, can they share that information with you? If a student also isn't rostering because perhaps their 1% status is marked incorrectly on their Scram record, who can you check with about that? Who's going to change that Scram record? Who should be changing that Scram record? Hopefully, those two people are the same people. Same with WEDA. I don't see my student in WEDA. His EL record is not marked correctly. Who takes care of that? Finally, course exit and entry dates. What if I have a student that has issues with those enrollment dates, so they're not rostering? Who can change that? And who do you contact if there's an issue with that? I think here's where we can go into a breakout room. We can have these discussions.
Go ahead and set your timers for 5 minutes, and go ahead, and Emily's going to put you in your breakout rooms, and obviously you're going to discuss. We'll leave the slide up so you can have that conversation. Okay, time's up. Hopefully everybody's starting to come back.
I did notice there was one question in the chat. What does lowest course period mean in the tiebreakers? Literally, that is the period you've assigned the course to. First period, second period, third period. If we get down that low on a tiebreaker, we are just looking for things that are going to differentiate classes. Lowest course period is one of those things. All right, next slide. So our last slide, this is a request that was made to us by a district recently. We don't put it up here to shame anyone. No shame that they asked this question. I know we're all trying to do our best, but it sort of covers a lot of rostering topics. There was a district that contacted us. They wanted to test their 7th graders in Acadian's math and reading, and they were wondering if they could just put them in as 6th graders. To test in Acadian's math and reading. Obviously, there are several reasons. There are several reasons here why this would not work. Does anyone want to come off mute or drop something in the comments about why this would not work? Otherwise, I can just tell you. The top reason, we don't pay for 7th graders to take Acadian's math and reading, so that's a thing. You should be 7th graders are on different levels in math and reading than 6th graders, so that exactly, you're reporting to the state the wrong grade. There's really no correlation between 7th graders and 6th graders flexile wise. There's just this one, we all scratched our heads a little bit. Please just, I know we try to be creative, but let's keep our rostering clean, correct grade. Kim, did you have anything else you wanted to add about this one?
I did it more than just the fact that, remember that there are strict contracts about which assessments are provided. And the first thing was, of course, like she said, the contract doesn't provide for this kind of rostering. And of course, dropping students into a different grade level now has removed their, any of the reliability and validity for the tests. And there's multiple things with that. But that's one of the number one reasons why this would never.
Excellent. Scott brings a good point. They've already taken the 6th grade test the year before. There's another thing to consider. All right. I think that's it for me. Thanks for your attention, and we'll move on to the next person.
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. I'm going to just jump in with a comment as we transition. In my breakout group, we were talking about this. The this is really, we're focusing on UTREX uploads, right? How important. UTREX is something that happens behind the scenes. Most educators in our environments don't really have much understanding about UTREX and the sequence and how that information is transferred from your SIS system all the way up to the state, that then influences rostering and other very important decisions that get made from a digital, electronic, automated standpoint. So while it's behind the scenes, the consequences of errors that are introduced into UTREX, your UTREX submission, are usually become pretty public, at least within your environment, meaning students don't roster. That's just one example, but when the UTREX submissions from your LEA have errors in them, there's other kinds of consequences that can be there. So, as you talk in your LEAs, one important consideration is most of the data that's entered into your student information system occurs at a registrar or secretary level. And I think it's just important to, while you're together today, to consider whether your communication plan with those individuals, your registrars and secretaries, is defined enough, and if you're comfortable that it's meeting the needs of that group of employees. I think it's not uncommon for us to sometimes not engage with those employees to the level that could really help them and mitigate errors that then result in public facing or other issues that impact the entire district. So thank you.
We just have another quick introduction. Emily is actually running this meeting for us, and she runs all of our meetings, unless Jerry Record is helping support her. Her first album was the Braveheart soundtrack, and if you know Emily, that didn't even surprise me when I saw that. It just made me laugh. Anyway, she is our host for all of our recordings. She is the person who posts everything to our YouTube channel, and she does an excellent job. Virtually every meeting we host that is recorded is generally, if she has anything to do with it, posted on our YouTube channel within 24 hours of any meeting that we have. And that is all due to her efforts. Another thing for many of you to know, she is also in charge of helping with Move It accounts. And we use Move It accounts to, move secure data back and forth between rostering. Our alert paper folders alert paper notifications go through Move It accounts. They are pretty limited on who can have a Move It account, but if you are supposed to have one and it's expired, Emily is the person that you reach out to. She also works with Jessica and Tracy with the Braille embossers. She is one of the people who helps deliver them. She keeps track of them. And so if you get an email from her asking about Braille embossers, please make sure that you reach out and answer those questions for her because she needs that. We're going to go ahead and move now to our next. We're going to now move to accommodations and accessibility. Jessica, I think, is going to be sharing her screen, and both she and Tracy are going to be presenting. So. You guys maybe.
Okay, I'm ready. Good morning. My name is Jessica Wilhelm. I'm one of the special education assessment specialists at USBE, and I oversee and work with our assessments for RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, AP, CTE, also working with Tracy with Braille. And as far as my memory serves me, I think my first album was New Kids on the Block. I was an 80s baby. Tracy, do you want to come off and introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Tracy Gooley. I'm our other special education assessment specialist here at USBE. So I am supporting accommodations and accessibility in all of our early learning assessments. So that would be PEEP, KEEP, and Acadians. And then I also work with Anne Michelle and Megan on accommodations with WIDA. And then I oversee all of our alternate assessments. So the big one is dynamic learning maps. But we also have alternate assessments for Acadians, PEEP, KEEP, and WIDA as well. And anybody that knows me, I'm from Wyoming, so I am a country girl at heart, always will be. So Trisha Yearwood, I was a huge Trisha Yearwood fan, still am. So that was my first album was one of hers.
Okay, so let's talk about accommodations in relation to our statewide assessments. So we know accommodations change how students learn, and our accommodations are meant to provide equitable access to not only grade level instruction, but we also take careful into consideration how are we providing that access for our statewide assessments. When we have our accommodations outlined, we are ensuring that the accommodations that we are saying are allowable for students do not alter the validity or the score interpretation or the reliability or security of those assessments. It is extremely important for all educators that are involved with making accommodations for students in their statewide assessments to be aware of the allowable accommodations for each statewide assessment, and they are going to be different from assessment to assessment. So you should be familiar with the statewide assessment that you are making decisions about when you were at the table during IEP meetings and 504 meetings. If a student has an accommodation, it is important to note that they will be marked as accommodated as the student's participation code. And it's also an important reminder that accommodations that students use instructionally are not always appropriate for standardized assessment. And that's because certain instructional accommodations could invalidate the validity of the scores for statewide assessments. That's a common question that we get asked. So also another misconception that I often have encountered as a special educator is educators having an idea that if a student cannot use an accommodation on a statewide assessment, they then don't allow it instructionally. And that's not really how that works. You can use things instructionally that you don't use on a statewide assessment, and that's okay. We just have to make that differentiation. Okay, when to use modified codes when it comes to statewide assessments. In years past, we have had an allowance for certain accommodations to be allowed that weren't necessarily outlined as an allowable accommodation. And those teams have pushed forward and marked this student as participating with modified. But we are just kind of getting a little stricter with this year. And it's not really Tracy or myself. It's not a USBE decision. It's really when we dig into IDEA. IDEA explicitly states that states are only allowed to allow accommodations that don't invalidate students' score. So with that in mind, we cannot at the state level, due to federal law in IDEA, allow for these accommodations that modify participation. So IEP teams are no longer allowed to determine that a student will participate in statewide assessments with modifications. And this is directly from IDEA. However, we know that misadministration does happen, and there are going to be times when students do use non-allowable accommodations in error. We know mistakes happen. So when that does happen in error, not intentionally, we don't want you intentionally doing this, you do need to mark that modified participation code of 202 for RISE and UA+. And it's also very important to be aware that when this happens, that student will not be accounted for in accountability. They will be a non-participant, so it does impact your accountability. Tracy, did you want to add anything there about other assessments?
Yeah, I'm going to add one thing. So, so being that this no longer is an IEP team decision to choose participate modified, if it does happen, it could be in a space where it could result in a denial of FAPE if wanted. So it is recommended that if this does happen, that your team needs to reach out to the IEP team, which really quote unquote means parents, to let them know what's happened and to kind of help navigate those decisions. So if you do find yourselves in a position that this has happened, please feel free to reach out to Jessica or myself so we can help navigate that if need be, but just be aware. You will see that modified code still existing, but it's something that we should not hopefully be seeing, and we don't see many across the state anyway. It's risen a little bit in the last couple of years, but for the most part, teams do stick to those accommodations.
Okay.
Why
Here's
would hold on, so one sec. So why would the modified code still exist if we can't use it? So that's a great question, Jamie. So it still is there because if you do have misadministration for some reason and the team chooses to not invalidate or retest, it still needs to indicate on that student's score that they participated modified. Now, for example, we calculators are not allowed in grades 3 through 5. So let's say a student uses a calculator in grade 3-5. The system doesn't know that it was modified. So at the end of the day, it produces a score, it moves forward, but that score no longer becomes reliable, right? Because we used an accommodation that's not allowed. So we just have to indicate that as far as like reporting purposes. Does that make sense? Okay, and then we have, if a student has an accommodation, Jamie said yes. If a student has an accommodation on their IEP, like they can be in a quieter room, they can't have that accommodation. So Julie, this is a really good question. We have some resources that IEP teams really need to be referring to. It's kind of back to that first slide that Jessica had where when we talk about teachers really need to understand what's allowed and not allowed. It really is important. And our special education teachers are at the table, right, leading those conversations. So they really do, if their students are participating in Acadians, right, or RISE or Utah Aspire Plus, we have an accommodations policy that outlines all of this, and every individual test administration manual, or a TAM, outlines allowable accommodations and also the things that are resources. And teams need to be familiar with that so they can appropriately guide those conversations during those meetings. So we do have resources for you to dig into and teams, and we've got that in a slide a little bit later. So as you move into looking at those resources and determining that, please let us know if you have any continuing questions around that. But there are a lot of what we call kind of UDL or resources available to all students. Even though it may be indicated for a student that they need an alternate location or minimize distraction, for RISE especially, all students can have that. It needs to be indicated on IEP so that it's ensured that it's provided to the student, but it now becomes standard administration. So it really is important to understand, you know, what things are considered UDL tools for all students and what things are considered accommodations.
Okay, so here's some suggested good practices around making good decisions with accommodations and state assessment. And in a few slides later, we have linked our Utah participation in accommodations policy. If I were you, when I held IEP meetings at the district level, I always had our state policy manual with us. This is an excellent reference point to ensure that that is, you know, right there in view, and also for parents to be familiar with. You know, parents often have a lot of questions and, you know, maybe they're concerned where, you know, these policies are coming from. Have this policy manual available to our parents because they are our team members and they should have the same resources that we have as educators to make decisions for their students. Understanding the different allowable and non-allowable accommodations is important for all test administrators, not just our special education teachers. These are team decisions, so every team member needs to be familiar with the decisions that are at the table. And in doing so, it's going to help minimize those misadministrations and unintended modifications. And having in place at your LEA procedures for assessment accommodations for before, during, and after administration. When we go out and do statewide visits for state assessments, I think at every visit we were at last year, we encountered an error. And one of the things in talking with different staff is there should really be a checks and balances before testing to ensure, okay, yes, I have submitted these accommodations, but what are you doing before the student opens up that test to have a final check that that accommodation was applied correctly? Because there's human error. When you were doing this in mass production, there's errors. So you should have several checks and balances in place before that student opens that test, because then that kind of opens up a whole other can of worms of things we have to go through for that student, and it's not a good experience for the student either. Accommodations, as a reminder, start with instruction. What is happening instructionally helps determine what we can do for our statewide assessment. Again, as I said before, we do not look at statewide assessment and say, oh, the student can only have these outlined accommodations, so that's how we're going to teach our students. Absolutely not. Instruction is the most important thing, and then we consider statewide assessment. Hey, so think about who is responsible for these decisions along the way at your LEA. Who at your LEA, and this, is for you to discuss with your staff and team members, who disseminates updated assessment accommodations information to district and school staff? Who is responsible for submitting those accommodations requests? And, along with that, have they had the appropriate training to make those requests? They have the resources that they need to make them. Who will be responsible for ordering accommodation materials for Utah Aspire Plus and ACT? Specifically, those materials, have to be ordered for those assessments, especially if a student is going to use paper or Braille. Who's going to be entering accommodations for participation codes into the assessment systems? And here's one that often gets overlooked, even though it's a small part of our student population. It's an extremely important one. How are teachers of the visually impaired, your TVIs, how are they trained to administer assessments? This is particularly important with the RISE assessment. And who will get them up with test administration accounts in the assessment systems? What is your process or checks in place to ensure accommodations requests have been approved and set up with each assessment? And this is going to look different for each LEA. Every role is going to be different from LEA to LEA because we're all staffed differently.
So Jessica, will you go back? So here's, these are the kind of the tasks and questions that we want you guys to consider right now. So Kim, can we do 5 minutes to have these conversations happen at the table? It is not uncommon that I and Jessica will start being in that loop too, that I will get emails or phone calls from the librarian who is the testing proctor, and a special ed teacher just walked in and handed her a list of all the things that a student needs and says here and walks out. And then they're looking for clarification of what they're supposed to do with that. And it is quite often that I find things on lists where I'm like, you can't provide that accommodation to a student for testing. So we really do need you guys to have some serious discussions around how are we disseminating accommodation information down to the teacher level. So we'll give you 5 minutes.
Hey, it's been 5 minutes, Emily. I don't want to touch anything with the rooms.
Yeah, we're back, Jessica.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so here are 2 things that we have encountered many times during assessment observations. What do you do when a student starts testing with the wrong or missing accommodation? And this is our advice. You need to stop testing immediately. Contact your appropriate school administration. Let people be made aware of what's happened. And then we would like those administrators to contact us at USBE, either myself or Tracy, depending on what assessment, or either one of us will help you out. And then we will talk through, depending on the scenario, determining appropriate next steps on whether we want to invalidate that test, start the test over, whether we can just get the accommodation set up and put in place and continue the testing. It really just depends on what the circumstance is. And here's the most important thing. Always contact parents with what happened and keep them informed, because accommodation decisions are team decisions in parents or team members. You will always keep a fire from blowing up in flames when we are keeping parents informed of what's happening with their students. But what you do not want to do is just continue testing, because this could lead to a unilateral IEP team decision, and it's a denial of fate for that student. So if a student starts testing with their wrong or a missing accommodation, immediately stop testing and contact your administrator to follow through with these steps so we can make the most appropriate decision for the circumstance.
And with that, Jessica, so where this really came into play is we actually had quite a few ACT situations come down last year. So Jessica and I were navigating that across the state. And I get where teams, they discovered there was an issue when they got going, but because it was ACT, they felt like they had to finish. And so then at that point, we were on the phone with parents. We were helping support LEAs and parent decisions. So it really is just stop down testing, even if it's ACT, because Jessica and I, and mostly Jessica, we have that ability to get to ACT, to get to our RISE providers and help navigate some quick next steps. So that we can help you get correct information to parents and give autonomy to them too, and feel part of that process of what we do next. So it really is important to not continue with testing. And Kim put in the chat, what is denial of FAPE? So I know we have some special educators and our special education directors in the room, but when we refer to denial of FAPE, so the whole purpose of IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is all of our entitlement program and federal regulations around educating students with disabilities. When we talk about a denial of FAPE, FAPE stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. So part of that whole IEP process and what goes into play with an IEP is that student's right and how they're going to access appropriately that free and appropriate public education. So really that IEP plan becomes sort of like a binding document, right? And so when we do have things that happen that fall outside of what was determined by that team in that IEP, it can lead to what we call a denial of FAPE. So if parents, feel like there was some egregious thing or the student wasn't provided, right, their FAPE, then they can file due process. And we do our best to help work around that for you guys. We don't ever want to see you in that position.
Yeah, and this directly comes from case law. This has absolutely happened in districts, not in Utah, that a student has tested without an accommodation that was agreed upon. Parents found out from the student and have filed due process. And what have courts said? The courts have said you denied that student a free and appropriate public education. And we do know this from Utah circumstances. We had a student who began testing with the wrong ACT materials last year. We were able to get the correct materials to the student. ACT scored both of those, one without her appropriate accommodations and one with them. And she had a drastic difference in scores. And that really highlights the difference between just giving kids access to a test versus giving them their appropriate accessibility. The accessibility is what the students need to demonstrate their knowledge. Okay, another circumstance. What do you do when a student refuses to use an accommodation? And y'all have probably all been there. I know I definitely was there as a teacher. And this is our guidance to you. Again, stop testing immediately. Contact the appropriate school administrator. And again, most importantly, contact the team, which is the parents, with the next steps. And document whatever team decision was made. So when you make that phone call to the parents, it's not that you need to hold off testing that day and have a full-blown IEP meeting, but let the parents know what's happening, and with the parents' input, determine how you want to proceed with the testing and have some sort of documentation to keep in that student file of what was determined on how you will proceed. But what you don't want to do, again, just like in the other case, is you do not want to just continue testing because, again, that's a denial of that student's free, appropriate public education, their fate, because if that decision was already made in an IEP, the student does not have autonomy. The student themselves, what this looks like in the court of law is when a student refuses an accommodation and the school just allows that, how the courts see that is you as the school just let the student determine their IEP team decisions, and the student is not a sole member of an IEP team. So it needs to be a team decision in how you proceed forward with how you're going to work out the situations. Okay, so here are some key resources that we referred to in our previous slides. Here's our contact information. If you go to our special education assessment webpage, it does have our Utah's participation and accommodations policy linked there. If you don't have this at every IEP and 504 room that you're holding meetings on in your campus, I would strongly encourage you to do that. And then also Tracy and I developed an accessibility accommodations and assessment resources Padlet that really just kind of is a quick at your finger resource for all of our assessments in the state, and with some good key resources for accessibility accommodations. And also included on this Padlet, Tracy and I have calendared in some open office hours, and they are listed on the Padlet on one of the tabs, and you will see that with the Zoom link. You don't have to register for any of the open office hours. You just click on that Zoom link, and it'll take you to it, and we just have just brief topics that we will discuss at each meeting. And really, it's just for you as educators. If you have burning questions that you want to ask, we'll be there live to chat with you. So you can disseminate that to your special education staff, your special education teachers. I would definitely, if you haven't pushed that Padlet out to them, please disseminate that to them, and they themselves, if they'd like to join those open office hours. We try to accommodate hours at the elementary and secondary times, so we'd be happy to chat with them. All right. I think y'all get a break after me. Yes.
We're going to take 10 minutes, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about the testing ethics policy and test administration. So 10 minutes, and we will see you right back at 10:38. If anybody has any questions they need to ask, right now is a great time. You can go ahead and type it in on the chat if you'd like to. We're happy to, answer any questions that you might have up to. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start talking now about testing ethics, which is everyone's favorite topic, I'm sure. But there are, one of the reasons why we proposed having this meeting is because we have seen, sadly, an uptick in some testing ethics violations. I sometimes lend it to the fact that we're now in a, if you see something, say something lifetime now. And so hopefully it's because people have much more awareness. But we wanted to give you a chance to talk about some of the stickier things in our testing ethics policy, testing ethics scenarios. We wanted you to be aware of some of the issues that we get asked about. I get asked about a lot. And just so you know, all of these are actual situations that have occurred and that we were provided with. Same thing with pretty much every example that we've given in this entire presentation are actual examples of questions about rostering, questions about accommodations, questions about testing ethics. So we're not making these up. These are not unicorns. These are the real thing. So one of the things that some people aren't aware of, and that is that there is an actual testing ethics violation protocol set up in R277-404. So if you have a suspected testing ethics violation, it's actually up to the school or the LEA to begin the investigation. So if you find a testing ethics violation at a school, you should immediately contact your LEA assessment director. And if you don't know who that is, today is the day you need to find out who that is. What's going to happen is that person will review and see what happened. And if they don't find any violation, it's all good. If they do see an issue, and it's not determined to be something that needs to be reported to UPAC, which is the Utah Professional Licensing Board, it's a school or an LEA consequence. And we're going to talk about what those LEA consequences are in just a minute. If it does have to be reported to UPAC as determined by the LEA AD review, and oftentimes when this happens, we are contacted, both Darren and I are contacted about this situation, and then of course it's referred to UPAC. And that's the basic scenario that happens. So if there's a suspected violation, there is a protocol for that as well. You can contact whomever you feel most comfortable with. Obviously, school administrator should be included, unless it is a school administrator that you think has committed the violation, in which case I would go immediately to your district or board member level person that you need to talk to. You can also notify the USBE. There is an internal audit webpage. We get many reports through that report. Darren is forwarded those from the internal audit committee. Then he sends them to me, and then we start our investigation. And then also sometimes they're just sent directly to UPAC. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you 4 testing ethics violation scenarios. And what we're going to do is you are going to go back into your breakout rooms or into your rooms, and discuss these. And what we would like you to talk about is why these would be considered testing ethics violation, what evidence is shared in the policy that explains why these would be violations, and what are the appropriate testing ethics procedures for each scenario. And remember that this starts at your LEA. And one of them, what is the procedure that your LEA follows? And then I put this as number 4, but it really should be the last one so that you think about this. What are the consequences for students when testing ethics violations occur? And we're not talking about student cheating. We're talking about the adults in the room when they violate the policies. What happens to the students? Because that's one of the things that often gets left out of this situation. And we want you to be aware that whenever this stuff happens, there is sometimes a pretty severe consequence for students as well. The things that happen that they have to deal with as well. So here are the 4 scenarios. We're going to put you into breakout rooms. We're going to give you 10 minutes, and we would like you to look at these. Now, all of these, by the way, are listed in the testing ethics PowerPoint that is supposed to be shared every single year with every single person who touches a statewide test in your LEA. And that means anybody who might be involved in testing in any way has to complete that standard test administration and testing ethics policy and sign that they understand that they've completed that form. So we're going to go ahead and do these scenarios. Emily, go ahead and get ready. Put everybody back in breakout rooms, please. I'm going to go on mute, and I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes, and we're going to go ahead and have you just go ahead and have your discussion. Thank you, everybody. Would somebody from the different groups, anybody want to add, what is the consequence for the students for scenario 1? Go ahead and type the answer in the chat or come off mute if you're brave. It's not just a test proctoring violation, but also what's going to happen is that the test is going to be invalidated. And that with the validation code for cheating 213. So there's no score, it's invalidated. It's also a test proctoring violation because the proctor was not actively proctoring. And just so you know, and it couldn't violate many tests. It's not that they're sitting down while they're proctoring. It's not that active proctoring is not happening. It's the student accessing the electronic device and doing that, and then sharing the test item, which, as you saw from the item development process, we put that first on purpose so that you could see the amount of time and money it takes to create an item on a test. And if they get shared, that's part of it. So if you're just seated at a desk and not really paying attention, and students somehow are able to access an electronic device and shares, that item gets removed from our item bank as well. It's a huge, huge violation. So it's a test proctor, but then also the student's test gets invalidated. That scenario happens most often, by the way, with our WIDA access tests, because what's happening with WIDA access tests is that oftentimes the students don't, because it's not as many students complete WIDA access, the proctors don't tend to get as much training. So oftentimes they're put in the library with a whole bunch of people. And that's one of the situations that we want you to be aware of. That happens the most often with our WIDA tests, and is resulted in multiple reports of plagiarism, as some of you know. Scenario 2, what happens with this is, again, the proctor doesn't follow the test administrations, clicked past it, and administers it incorrectly. The students may have to take the test over. Same thing with scenario 3. That is a huge violation. That violates the parental exclusion policy in a huge way. And I can guarantee now, because we have seen much more active parent involvement with parental exclusion, that I won't be the first person to hear about this. Neither will Darren. I am sure that you will be the first person to hear about that. And then in scenario 4, we already just went over that pretty much in detail. But if a student completes the test without accommodations, basically that test needs to be reset, and the student's going to have to take the test over unless the parent decides then to exclude the student, and now your participation rates get consequences. So testing ethics is a serious discussion, and that's one of the reasons why when people are asking, can we lump it together in the modules that we give all the teachers have to complete at the beginning of the school year, we just have them click something to make sure. It's really important that everyone understands the severity of this. Teachers can and have lost their teaching licenses for violating these policies. The 2 statewide assessments or tests that have the most violations tend to be our Acadians tests and WIDA. For Utah Aspire Plus and for RISE, because there are many, many more built-in situations within those testing platforms, we tend to not have as many inadvertent misadministrations unless their accommodations haven't been set correctly. And that's when that kicks in for those, in case you were wondering. So that was, we wanted to have that discussion with you so that you were aware at the time of what's going on. So anybody have any other questions about this before we move on to talking about our assessment overviews? We're going to spend the next little while going over a lot of situations. Tracy's going to start talking about DLM. And then Elise is going to spend a lot of time talking about specific situations with RISE, particularly when it comes to resets and invalidations, things that are coming directly from school, so that we are aware, that everyone's aware of it. So Tracy, do you want me to run the slides for you?
Nope, I've got them. Okay. All right. Maybe. Okay, here we go. All right, so we're going to go through some alternate assessment information. I think the first place to start is, who are our alternate assessments for? So quite often we get some emails that will come through that say, hey, we've got this student that can't read and should take an alternate assessment. So alternate assessments are for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And who these students are is the IEP team has to be the one to determine that a student has a significant cognitive disability and that it significantly impacts their intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior, and those formal scores in a student's IEP evaluation are significantly below grade level expectations. These are students with severe and complex needs, and really the key to this is because the student has a significant cognitive disability, it is going to limit them from meaningful participation in our regular standard academic curriculum and assessments. So it's IEP teams that determine a student participates in an alternate assessment. So that you are aware, here is a big chart that outlines all of our alternate assessments that these students, when an IEP team makes that determination, should be participating in. So IDEA, back to that IDEA federal regulations, gives the charge that any state or local school district or local school that has a required assessment that all students participate in, there needs to be an alternate assessment for those students who IEP teams determine they need to participate that way. So we do have alternate assessments to our PEEP assessment, to the KEEP assessment, to Acadience Reading and Acadience Math. We use dynamic learning maps, or often known as just DLM, for our grades 3 through 11 assessment in place of RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, and ACT. WIDA also has an alternate assessment. So we do have students with significant cognitive disabilities who are also English learners. The two statewide assessments that we don't have alternates to is NAEP and Apple. And the reason why there is not an alternate assessment to NAEP is because NAEP is just only looking at students in where students are performing in the grade level standards. So if you are a site that gets chosen to be a NAEP participant, which I'm sure Angela will talk about a little bit later, that's where that 1% marker flag really comes into play. So if you have students that have been indicated as alternate assessment participants for NAEP, they get excluded from that and they choose a different kiddo to participate. And then Apple just is a dual language. So the key to this is we have alternate assessments. They are expected to participate. And if you as an LEA have an assessment that you are using district-wide. So sometimes our districts are requiring students to participate in benchmarks or interim assessments. And if that is the case, you should be doing an alternate assessment for those students as well. So keep that in mind. And dynamic learning maps in our grades 3 through 11 have what's called an instructionally embedded assessment that can be used in place of any other benchmark or any sort of formative assessment tool that you guys are using. Okay, with that, let's dig into DLM. So we talked about this. It's our alternate assessment in place of RISE, UA+, and ACT. The spring testing window opens up on March 11th and goes through June 7th this year. That instructionally embedded model is open and available through February 23rd. So if you have students that need to engage in a benchmark-like assessment in grades 3 through 11, this would be an assessment to do. There's an error on this slide. Students who take DLM. So it's actually grades 3 through 11 for ELA and math. And then science, we start in grade 4. So you will not see third graders rostered for science. The other key with this is we do offer language translation for math and science. So as that has opened up in our general education assessments for RISE and Utah Aspire Plus, we try to follow along the same guidelines the best we can with our alternate assessments. So students are allowed to have, for math and science, that language translation there. So when thinking about responsibilities, we're going to take some time and talk through this. What we need you guys to talk about is who in your district is ensuring that our students in our early learning assessments, PEEP, KEEP, Acadience, and WIDA, who's ensuring that those students who are considered are what we call 1% students or are students with significant cognitive disabilities, who's ensuring that they're participating in those alternate assessments. So we need to make sure that that is happening. DLM, here are tasks that you guys need to figure out what you do. So how students get routed in DLM, and Maureen had talked about this a little bit earlier, is there's that 1% or alternate assessment flag. It really is a checkbox that typically resides in the student's SCRAM record, which is their special education record. When that gets flagged, we know that that student needs to route to an alternate assessment or to DLM. Then from there, once students are into the system, and that is in a nightly load, so those students are coming in and out of the system based upon that 1% flag. We are loading students as we speak. Once they're in there, somebody has to create the rosters. So we do not create teacher rosters. So it is imperative that you guys have in your district or your charter school designated at least one person that is the district test coordinator. There can be multiple district test coordinators. Typically, what I advise to do is to have our assessment director and our special ed director be those, or they appoint someone to do that. So there needs to be someone with that role. You're also responsible for adding your teachers. So if you have new teachers that are coming in and they're going to administer DLM, that gets added by a district test coordinator. That district test coordinator is responsible for creating rosters. I need you guys to talk about disseminating DLM score reports. So there is in board rule that after, what is it, Kim, 3 weeks? Within 3 weeks that you have score reports, they need to be disseminated to parents. So you guys need to figure out who's doing that. Who's going to enter those special circumstance codes or participation codes in the system, and that has to be done by a DTC. That cannot be done by a district user or a building user. And then what about training? What are we doing for training, and how are we monitoring? So those are the things that I need you guys to talk about and spend some time discussing. So Kim, what, 5 minutes? And then Emily, can you go ahead and route to some breakout rooms?
Yep, I've set the timer for 5 minutes.
Awesome, thank you.
You can probably go ahead.
Okay, hopefully we have everybody back. So I'm hoping Teresa or Sid are still on. So it looks like there's a question. We were told that the KEEP entry will no longer be required. Is that accurate? So I don't know if
I can answer that, Tracy.
Okay, go ahead.
So the KEEP is still required for this current school year. So you should give the KEEP exit at the end of this year in the spring of 2024. After that, starting in the school year 2024 to 2025, the KEEP will not be the required kindergarten assessment. Instead, it will be our reading and math benchmark assessments. So for math, that will be Acadience, and for reading, it depends on who wins our RFP that is currently out for the reading benchmark assessment.
So with that then, what most likely will happen is we will probably take the existing KEEP alternate assessment and come back to the table and look at what we need to do to put that in place as our alternate assessment for whether it's Acadience or whoever. Does that make sense, Lenice? So we'll have that information ready for you next year.
Yeah, and we are still allowing LEAs to give the KEEP assessment, and we will still be supporting that. It will not be the required assessment, and we will no longer designate specific calendar days to give the KEEP assessment.
Okay, so then we had another question here, and I don't know, Teresa, stay on, maybe you can help with this, or Kim. So we're confused because the parent report date for Acadience and KEEP was 1 month after the close of the window. Per documents and questions in assessment meeting last week, but here DLM has 3 weeks. Can we clarify?
So the dates that are given there in the chat are correct for the Acadians and Keep. It's 1 month after the close of the window. I don't know if the DLM has a different requirement. I guess you would have to speak to that, Tracy.
Okay, so I think, oh, go ahead, Sid.
I think I can clarify. So the dates that are there for the Keep and Acadians are the dates that you have to enter the data by. The recommendation for reporting to parents is within 3 weeks. We have a little bit of flexibility with that with Acadians and Keep. Like if you have an upcoming parent-teacher conference and it makes sense to share that data with them at a parent-teacher conference, but it's a little outside of that 3-week reporting to parents window, then that it would be allowable. So the difference is the data entry into the system versus reporting to
parents. So, I kind of give the same with DLM too. So you guys get score reports back, and I'm going to get into your question, Ryan. So DLM score reports are available in August. So unfortunately, we don't have the same automatic reporting with our year-end DLM like we do with Rise in Utah Aspire Plus. So by the time you come back to school in August, those reports are in. And I think that first parent-teacher conference is a great time to disseminate those reports. That way teachers can sit down, talk to parents about it. So what we don't want to do is come January, give out score reports. So you have that 3-week timeline. But again, I think with Sid, with DLM, I think it is appropriate to do it at that parent-teacher conference, or if you have the first IEP meeting that you hold between the start of school and parent-teacher conference, that would be a good time too. Okay, if Kite does not allow us to put rosters in, which is required in order to gain access to scores that are not shared until August, how do we meet that 3-week timeline? So as far as rostering, teachers do not have access to score reports until students are rostered. District people, you guys have access come the beginning part of August. Those score reports are available to all district level users in there. You would download those as like a bundle. And Ryan, I know where you're going to go with this. So I can imagine the looks on the faces of you all in the room right now. So those come down in a bundled PDF. Someone would have to separate them, or you can download them by student. So you'll need to navigate that. So reach out to me if you have questions personally. But score reports are available at the district level come August. Okay, so the next question, does this mean that all 1% students must take the alternate assessment, or does the 1% mean that they are eligible for enrollment? That is a great question. So in order to be eligible to participate in an alternate assessment, the IEP team determines the student has a significant cognitive disability and that they need access to instruction through the alternate achievement standards. Therefore, then they would participate in an alternate assessment. You could have a student that has a significant cognitive disability, and the team determines that that student can still access the grade level core curriculum. Therefore, they don't need instructional support with the alternate standards, and therefore they don't take an alternate assessment. So this is really tricky, and we've spent a lot of time really training teachers and going through this. So definitely get with your special ed people. If you want to talk about that more, we can. So they have to have a significant cognitive disability, and they have to require that instructional support in the essential elements to participate in alternate assessments. Okay. If we want to continue with the keep, is that an option? I think that was answered. Okay. Hopefully I got all of your questions. Please let me know if you need more support. For my district people, hopefully someone has designated a district test coordinator. I am holding a virtual training for district people on Monday, October 23rd from 9 to 12. There's the Midas course to register for that. There is a DLM district Padlet. I will record that training if you can't make it, and it will be posted to the Padlet once it's done. But this is a great place to come and learn and ask questions. Again, we are doing regional trainings. I'm crossing the state, and these are trainings geared towards teachers. I think district people can benefit by attending these if they want. I'm headed to St. George this afternoon, so I will be in St. George tomorrow doing a training. Here's the MIDAS course for that. This is not required. Teachers do not have to attend this with me. It's optional. I do recommend that new teachers attend these if possible. They will gain some great information, but I have many locations across the state. DLM resources, the DLM webpage, but there's a couple Padlets. There's a DLM district user resource Padlet and a DLM administration Padlet for teachers that houses tons and tons of information. So I will get these in the chat as soon as I'm done presenting. These are two fantastic resources to find the information that you need and guidance documents depending on your role. Can you go back 2 screens for the MIDAS number? Yes. So I will put the MIDAS number in the chat too. I know that we're on time, so you'll get these, and then I'll put this all in the chat for you. Okay, please do not hesitate to reach out if you have questions. I would rather you reach out and ask a question than to have wrong information and move forward with that. So, okay. Thank you.
Tracy, there was a request for the MIDAS number for that.
I will get all the MIDAS numbers and Padlet links into the chat so they can be grabbed.
Elise, go ahead and share your screen, and then I'll just talk about the NAEP, and then Angela can jump in to talk about NAEP since you pretty much have the rest of the slides for a while.
Well, it'll get there. Anyway, my name's Angela Battaglia. I'm not going to share a lot with you because of all the schools in Utah, we only have 206 schools selected to participate in NAEP this year. If you've been selected, your school has been notified. If you're not registered, I've emailed you numerous times now. So this doesn't apply to everyone. So I don't want to take up very much of your time. Just a couple little things that if you're on here and your school was selected, things are going to be evolving a bit with NAEP. This year, we're going to start using the school's internet. And so we're going to have a technology coordinator assigned for your school also. And then beginning next 2025, we're going to start using computers that are in the school. So that is kind of all of our information right now. Again, I want you just to know my face and know how to get in contact with me. If you have any questions, don't waste time trying to search answers. Just text, email, call, and I will get you the answers very quickly. If there's any questions, you can just put them in the chat or let me know. But thank you.
Hey, our early childhood assessments, we're not going to spend a lot of time on, but one of the things that we would like you to draw your attention to as you were probably looking at your accountability, the resource guide and the accountability task list is make sure you know when your deadlines are, who's responsible for sharing any of the upcoming training information that has been posted multiple times by both Teresa and Jared, who is coordinating the required parent notifications after the tests are complete. You know, there are letters and things that you're doing with parent-teacher conferences, and who's reviewing and ensuring that the data is used appropriately to inform instruction. Most of you already have procedures in place with that, so rather than going into a breakout room with that, because you may have already started discussing this in previous rooms, we're going to move on and start talking about RISE and Apple and the rest of our assessments. So go ahead and click the slide and you're up.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Elise Fry. I am the Test Administration and Formative Assessment Specialist with the Utah State Board of Education. I work with 4 separate systems within the assessment department: RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, Apple for our dual immersion students, and UTIPS, one of our formative tools available for all teachers. As far as my first album, I am I'm of a slightly younger generation, maybe, and I was more of a BearShare and Napster person, and that's where I got my very first albums. And I wouldn't say that I bought them, but I do on iTunes now. So for the Apple test, it is administered through our vendor LTI. It is for grades 3 through 9, the students who are enrolled in our dual immersion programs. If you're not familiar with this test and it is something that takes place in your LEA, it does require headphones and a microphone, so be aware of that. Our Apple testing window is coming up very soon. It opens October 16th and it will close December 1st. The links that I have here on this slide, the first one, Apple Central for Utah, is the website that LTI provides that is specific to Utah and our needs and our content and our contact information. The second one, the Helpful Apple Videos, has all sorts of different things that give you a step-by-step walkthrough of like accounts, how to clean up accounts, how to create accounts, how to access reports and how to read reports. And it does it through a demo style webinar, just super short little snippets. So if you're interested in those, they are provided for you. Really quickly, because I don't want to take a ton of time with Apple because I know that it doesn't apply to all of you, but it does apply to many. We're going to take like 2 minutes in breakout rooms with these questions in mind. Does your LEA participate in dual immersion? If yes, who's the point of contact for DLI teachers in your LEA? Do the teachers know who that contact is? Because for some of you, it might be an assessment director. For others, it might be a DLI coordinator. And if it's not your assessment director, who is it? Next, who presents, completes the required test administration training for all of the teachers who administer Apple in your LEA? I've also included the information that's on the resource guide and the task calendar there that you can look at later. And then the deadline for completing Apple tests, hopefully from the last slide you recall, December 1st. Emily, if you'll do breakout rooms really quick, again, just 2 minutes, super short. That way it's easy for those who participate and it's not too much downtime for those who don't.
I've said
just as some points of contact for you as we're coming back into the main room here. These are the contact, email, and phone numbers for people who you could reach out to for any help or support that you need with Apple questions or test administration questions. First, I've listed the Apple support email and 1-800 number. That's going to go to LTI, our vendor. I've also included the email contact information for Carl Bowman, our dual language immersion specialist. My contact information is there as the test administration specialist. And then I've included contact for Maureen and for Jessica as they handle the rostering and the accommodations processes for both of these for the Apple assessment. The next one we're going to look at is UTIPS. So UTIPS is a formative tool that is owned by the state of Utah with teacher-created items in an item bank, with also the ability to create your own items and use in conjunction with the items that are already there listed. There are many types of items that you can create. If you're interested in learning more about this, you can contact me. I held a training in August that was recorded, and I'm happy to share that with you. Again, this is one that's available for K-12 teachers and all content areas. So it's available for all teachers, all students. And it's also the system currently housing is not the correct word, housing our high school core benchmarks for this new 23-24 school year. Just as a heads up, if you, many of you are aware of this already, but with those high school benchmark questions, they are currently in draft form as our content specialists review and get things ready in more of a solidified or final version format. But even in the draft form, they are there ready for you to use if you choose to. So I want you to take, again, just 2 minutes in your breakout rooms. Is this a tool you're currently using or have used in the past? Yes or no? And then there are some guiding questions following that. So again, 2 minutes in your breakout rooms regarding UTIPS and what it provides. All right, as we're coming back to the main room, if in your group you answered yes, With your successes and challenges that you may have discussed, with those challenges, if you'd like to reach out to me, I can provide any guidance I possibly can to help you try to alleviate those. If the answer is no and you see a place for this type of tool in your LEA, again, feel free to reach out and I can provide you with more information. With that, we're going to move into RISE.
You have a question in the
Okay, so when will high school core benchmarks be ready? Ninth graders are eager to use them. So they are there currently in the draft form, and you can use them in draft form. Sid, do you have a timeline as to when you feel your team might be ready as far as the more complete versions of the content review after they do their reviews?
That is a really great question. I'm not sure that we have a solid timeline yet. I'm hoping by probably beginning of November, possibly mid-November, but we'll make sure we communicate more clearly when there's a timeline for them to be finalized.
Perfect. Thanks, Sid. Okay. So with RISE is provided for students in grades 3 through 8 across science, ELA, math, and writing. There's 4 types of tests housed within our RISE system. You're familiar with many of them, if not all of them. We have training tests that students can take to familiarize themselves with the type of system, types of questions. It's a really low stakes place where teachers can provide needed support without the fear of interfering with their testing ethics policy. There's also the RISE benchmark modules, which can be used as instructional tools or formative tools. And then the interim tests, not currently available with science or writing, but they're for ELA and math. And then our RISE summative, which is adaptive and for any student enrolled in a course that generates a RISE test. Also, there is a Spanish adaptive assessment available for math and science content areas for the summative assessments. It is not currently available for the benchmark or the interim. With that said, there is also a Spanish adaptive option in the training test. And there is guidance in the TAM for how to access both of those or to set the Spanish adaptive functionality for a student who may need that based on what your language team decides. Projected timeline for science interims. Sid or Scott or Jared?
I can take that one, Sid, if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
We don't have one, and I'm sorry. We've lost so much development, especially thanks to our Questar fiasco, that we really don't have an idea of when those will all be available. But as they become available, as more and more benchmarks become available, and as we're able to build an interim bank, we'll sure let you know as soon as that's possible.
Thanks, Scott. So when it comes to any administration of any of these forms of tests, the RISE portal and resources become your best friend. They're imperative to be familiar with. I've included links here for the RISE Tide user guide, the test administration manual, as well as the RISE reporting guide. And we're going to do a few activities with these just quickly within your groups. Because when we're looking at them, Control F is your friend. You're still welcome to print out any section or pages of the guides that you find helpful. But what I find most helpful is using them in their online format because I can search them really, really quickly. So for example, if like in this screenshot here, I was searching for, okay, how am I going to set Spanish adaptive? What are the guidelines here? And if I just open one up and type in Spanish with Control F, it's going to direct me to the 30 instances where Spanish is mentioned within the test administration manual, which is really nice to just guide you through really quickly at a glance and with clicking to get you through. So we're actually going to practice this a little bit. The links are included there in the chat. The first one, you've got the Tide user guide, then there's the test administration manual, and then the reporting guide. So it is your turn. If you need to know how to set a student's test settings to include an accommodation, which one of these guides are you going to use? Go ahead and you can just drop it in the chat really quickly when you find it. Thanks, Jumana. Yes, it is going to be in the Rise Tide user guide. Using that Rise Tide user guide, which pages would you find a list of the fields in the test settings and tools panels for accommodations? Again, do a quick search, use that Control F to your advantage, and then just drop it in the chat. First one wins bragging rights.
And as a hint, there's actually four pages where that information appears.
Yes, there is. You don't need to include all four to get it right, though. You should be able to see, it'll appear in a table of sorts, like a kind of like a chart or table. Another hint for you would be to search my italicized words. Brooke, I'm not sure that it's on 42. I don't have that one as an option. I am going to write it down and check that, though.
So what's the answer, Elise?
Our choices would have been 16 and 17, 51, or 102. Let's try another one. On what page of which guide would you find guidance on interpreting summative writing scores? So this one, you need to think, which guide would you use for summative writing scores? And then use that Control F to find guidance on how to interpret summative writing. So two parts to this one, the guide and its page number. Since we're looking at scores, our hint here is it's going to be for reporting. Thanks, Jumana. Yes, it's in the reporting guide. And where do we find something about summative writing? Awesome, 153. On what page of which guide would you find information regarding graph paper or being able to use that during a RISE test? So hints here thinking if it's during the test itself, is that going to be through TIDE? Thanks, Stacy. Yes, it's going to be in the TAM. And then using your Control F, where would we find information about graph paper? It's another one that's actually mentioned twice. So either one is appropriate. Yeah, there we go. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at with RISE is the idea of irregularities and appeals, because there are ways to invalidate, reset, or reopen a test, but there's also situations where that's not appropriate, even though we might think that that's how it should be done. So invalidating is when we invalidate a test due to cheating, a break in protocol from a test proctor, or if a parental exclusion was submitted following the administration of a test, it would still need to be invalidated. You can also reset a test so that it starts over from the very beginning and removes all student responses. You can reopen a test that was completed or invalidated or expired, and students can still respond. There's also a grace period extension, which allows students to review previously answered items if they resumed past the 20-minute pause rule. So we're going to look at some situations, and just, we're not going to go to breakout rooms this time. So either if you're on your own, just be thinking what you would do. If you're with a group, you can have like a 30-second discussion on what you would do in this situation. So would you invalidate, reset, reopen, or not? If a student started a writing benchmark module but missed school for a week following the opening of the session and the test opportunity has expired, what would you do? If you think you've got a good answer to formulate, feel free to come off mute and answer, or you can drop it in the chat, but we will talk about them really quickly in just a few seconds. In this situation, you don't need to reset it or reopen it because a student can take a benchmark module as many times as they would like to, as many times, I guess I should say, as the teacher allows, so they can just start it over, okay? Your next situation. A teacher has discovered a student had access to their smartwatch during a test session, used it to reference a text from a friend. What would you do in this situation? Again, about 30 seconds. You can come off mute or you can drop an answer in the chat, but we'll go over it. With this situation, if it is a benchmark module, you can still invalidate that and you'll use code 213. That's a new code this year because you can invalidate it due to cheating. Summative, same thing. You're going to invalidate it. Here's your next scenario. A student claims the test skipped ahead some questions without allowing the student to respond, and on the next day, the student could not return to those missed questions. Talk about it in your group or think about it on your own. What would you do or not do? With this one, hopefully, if this situation occurs in your LEA, students are notifying their proctors immediately to report issues like this. That's one of those proctoring issues we would also love to have addressed, is that beforehand, instruct students that if they have encounter a problem with the system, don't just sit there and try to deal with it. Like notify your proctor or your teacher. If you're in this situation, don't submit it. You can contact the RISE help desk to check the student's test. And just as a rule of thumb for you with this, the system is not going to allow a test to have unanswered questions before moving forward. Anytime we've had this situation come up and RISE goes in and checks the student's tests, there are responses that are entered, okay? It doesn't automatically put them there. A student might not remember which questions they answered and which ones they didn't, but just know that it's not going to skip them ahead it doesn't allow them to move forward without marking an educated guess of sorts. Your next scenario, a student is refusing to complete the assessment and causing a scene while other students are testing appropriately. What would you do in this situation? Generally, in this situation, we don't want you to add to the scene by pushing the student too far. You do not need to invalidate. You just need to enter the participation code 106, the student refused to test. Okay. Your next scenario, students were testing when an unexpected fire alarm occurred. With students away from their computers for more than 20 minutes, the current testing session expired. What would your next steps be? With this one, hopefully you've come to the conclusion that you can do a grace period extension. You'll need to detail the situation in a test appeal and then go ahead and approve those for the students who were affected by the fire alarm. Another one, a teacher submits a test appeal to have a student's test reset. When asked to provide a reason, the teacher enters because. This is one, many of these are from situations that we encountered this last school year, and this is definitely one that was there. And the LEA approved the reopen or the reset because of the rule or the reason because. And we want you to understand that because is not a valid reason to have a test reopened or reset. If this occurs in your LEA, please reject that request and ask for more detail before being able to make the call to approve or reject. And if you're still not sure, feel free to reach out to myself or to Kim Rathke. We're happy to help you, because this is one where there are times when we're contacted by LEAs and they'll say, we're sorry to provide so much information, and they'll include this really detailed email. And that's beautiful. That's what we need to see, because we need to be able to take into the environmental, the situation itself that occurred when irregularity happened, to help you make that determination of whether you should approve it or reject it. Okay. Another one here, a 5th grade student takes their RISE tests, but the parent submits a parental exclusion form for the ELA and writing assessments after the test has already been submitted. So a parental exclusion has come in after tests are done, but only for 2 of them. With this one, we have an interesting situation in that the ELA and writing tests need to be invalidated through the test appeals process. And then the new code of 214 needs to be added so that we know that it was invalidated due to parental exclusion. That way we also know it's not invalidated due to an academic integrity issue that may have occurred. We were going through some of our participation codes, and it was really interesting as we've had many tests that were marked with parental exclusion that had not been invalidated within the RISE system. And we know that it's different when you're working with lots of different systems to remember which ones have to go through a multi-step process or which ones are just a really quick click. But know that within the RISE system, you have to do both of those steps. You have to invalidate the test and enter the parental exclusion. Both of those things need to happen. When it comes to RISE support, again, here are all of the people that you can contact for any help or any questions that you may have. My section today is going to end with just a little quick information slide here about the Utah Aspire Plus test. The Utah Aspire Plus is our end-of-level grade assessment for grades 9 and 10. Okay, they're fixed form, not adaptive. One of the things with this one, as Maureen had touched on with her rostering thing, you want to pay attention to your dually enrolled students, because those tie-break rules start to get really tricky, especially when they're only enrolled in maybe 1 or 2 courses in your school. She had mentioned like drill team or driver's ed is actually one of the most common ones, that a student will take driver's ed at a brick and mortar, but all of their other courses are done online, and they're going to then end up rostering with that brick and mortar school. So just be aware of those types of things. The test window does open March 4th. I had some questions about how to access things and look at things in Pearson Access Next. While all of your previous years Utah Aspire Plus reports are still there, we are moving from the Pearson Access Next platform into Pearson's Atom platform for the spring 2024 administration. So you will see more about that in upcoming months. And similar to our RISE, we do have a Spanish adaptive assessment available for math, reading, and science within the Pearson system for Utah Aspire Plus. Question in the chat, what are the required RISE tests to be given each year? Kristen, that's going to be any of the courses that are coming through rostering. So you've got ELA, math, science, and writing. Writing is required for grades 5 through 8, and then science is grades 4 through 8. Third grade is the exception there. Any other questions I can answer for you regarding RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, UTIPS, or Apple before we move forward? Kristen, what do you mean by summative or interim and benchmark? Do you mean like which grades are offered for those? Summative, yes, Rick, summative is the only one that's required. Interim and benchmark are optional. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to speed up just a little bit, just a couple of things that we wanted you to be aware of. If you want to learn more, we have worked very hard. Our team of Scott, Elise, and Teresa worked very hard to create our assessment literacy modules. They are posted now. The Canvas links are posted on the Assessment Accountability website. And feel free to click in those. There's a self-directed course as well as a facilitated course. And we highly encourage you to look at those and use those. They're designed to be used one module per month for an entire school year. For formative assessment, if you want to learn more, we're really proud of this. Our formative assessment process toolkit. You've probably seen this advertised in our assessment directors meeting. They highlighted in curriculum directors meeting, in special ed, in the special ed directors meeting. Our formative process toolkit is also posted on the formative assessment tab in the assessment and accountability website. We're going to talk a little bit about the data gateway. We're not going to go through all of this in depth, but we wanted everybody to be aware of the fact that the data gateway is the place to find all of your, not only your current data, but your historic data as well for your assessment information. One of the things that you need to be aware of is that one of the challenges is that we have to protect personally identifiable information. So we put that in, we have to protect that so the information is aggregated at a certain level, especially if you're in the public facing side of the data gateway. Every educator in the state of Utah is eligible to have a data gateway account, and we highly recommend that you have that. But anything that's public is always masked so that you can't actually go all the way down to identify possibly individual student information. And on the data gateway, all of this information is available there. I know they had a few links last week that weren't working. They're working on some of it right now. But the data privacy information is provided there. You'll also notice on this slide that there's actually a data gateway training that's listed that you can also use in addition to what we're providing today. I also have this PowerPoint. Not only will the PowerPoint be provided to you, but in the next assessment directors meeting, we are going to pull out all all of the slides that the data and statistics team gathered together for us for this training, and we're going to link it as a separate document so that you can use this within your LEAs and play with this a little bit. And now for today, if you have your own account, you can go ahead and log in and you're going to see much more detailed information specific to your school, or you can just go ahead and use your just the public data gateway account and go in as a guest. But just so you're aware, the statistical method means that if a subgroup has 10 or fewer students, when you're looking at the public site, it's going to be recorded as n is less than 10, which just means that within that, you're not going to be able to see any identifiable information. Everybody can log in. If you can do this. If you select forgot password, the good news is that reset email is good for about 24 hours, not just like 15 minutes as it is with Rise. You have to complete the information to get a request, because they do check to make sure that you are eligible to have that kind of level of personally identifiable information. There's a quick start guide that's available for you that helps you with all of the information that I'm going to quickly click through. You can look up, for example, to find the student proficiency percentage. We get asked this, I get an email about this all the time, and I always refer you back to data and statistics because generally you want your school level information as well, but you can find that on the data gateway, and the 2023 information has been posted. For example, if you're going to look for it, you select the year, you select the LEA that you're looking for, it aggregates the proficiency, and then it also provides you with the subgroups. Of course, this is aggregated at the state level, so probably you will be able to see every subgroup because there will be more than 10 students. And this is a suggested activity that we have for you to go in to do this. Go in and pick a school year, an LEA, a grade level, and find the proficiency percents for 2019, the year prior to COVID-19, and for this last year for 2023. And look to see how different they are by subject areas and what subgroup has the lowest proficiency in math and what subgroup has the highest proficiency in science. This is the kind of information that's really useful for people to go in and try. And this is a great way to do it.
I'm gonna, it's just that, because you can hear it now for
When will scores by teacher students from last year be available? Thank you, Marie. I saw that. That won't be posted until the student report card, and Michelle will be able to tell you. As far as scores by teacher and students, I'm not sure. I know they were working on it, but I'm guessing it has something to do with when the student report card gets released, which will be next month. Okay. Just check the chat really quick. All right. Another thing to check that we get out. Did somebody have a question?
It's in Michelle. I wondered if I can just quickly try to answer that question in case I forget when it's my turn. The data gateway was updated at the beginning of this week along with the LEA folders that contain all of the data and statistics Tableau reports. And that's where you will be able to access grade level, teacher level, student level data. That's all I know. If you have questions, contact Data and Statistics, but I believe that the Data Gateway and the Tableau reports were published at the same time at the beginning of this week. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne Michelle. Also, another question that people always want to know is student growth, because that's what matters now to us is student growth. And you can also do the exact same thing in public. You can compare your students to what's happening around the state as well. The secure data gateway allows you to drill down further by teacher and class, and then student MGP versus proficiency as well. And so here's an example of a task that you might want to try to make sure that everybody is aware of how to do this, because teachers also want to know this information. So please make sure you're sharing it. And again, I updated the slide from 2019 to 20, so that they compare pre-COVID versus the current post-COVID world. And that was everything that I had. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Anne Michelle, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead and share.
Okay. Okay, hopefully this works. All right. Hi, everyone. And are you seeing the correct view? I think so. And my name's Anne Michelle Neal. I'm the accountability specialist. My first album was by Green Day, released in 1994, because I was one of those angsty 90s grunge teens. And I think some of those characteristics still remain in my personality today. So I also work with WIDA. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about WIDA today, but WIDA assessment questions, you can always reach out to me or to Megan Lopez. We both will be able to get you to the right answer and help you. All right. So what is accountability? Assessment directors are very familiar with me rambling about the complexities of school accountability. But when we talk about school accountability, what we're at its most basic level, we're taking school performance data, represented here as these little clusters of fruit. You think of all of the data. Oh, I need my camera on. I apologize, you guys. All of the data that comes from a school that we can collect, we then sort into categories of performance. Those are achievement, growth, English learner proficiency, growth of the lowest 25% of students, and post-secondary readiness. Now, I want to emphasize that not all data that comes from a school belongs in accountability. We're very careful about what we select for accountability indicators and what we include in school accountability. There is a lot of data that is more useful at your local level than it is in an accountability system. So diving a level deeper, those buckets we call indicators. These indicators indicate how well a school is performing, and they are defined in our state plan and in state statute. So our accountability system has been quite stable. We recently submitted an amendment to our ESSA plan, which was approved, and I'm going to talk about some of those changes that were included in the amendment that adjusted our indicators slightly. But it's important to know that those things are defined in law. And so we have a very reliable and stable system that we've been able to maintain over several years. Indicators are good if they meaningfully differentiate. If they are well designed, they meaningfully differentiate performance. So as an example, student achievement, you can create a distribution that shows schools across a whole range of performance. An example of an indicator that doesn't differentiate meaningfully might be the age of a school building. That has very little to do with student outcomes, I would argue, and doesn't really meaningfully tell us about the instruction that's taking place inside the building. Accountability results are published on the school report card is probably the most common way that many of you have heard of school accountability is through the school report card.
And then it's really important that a good accountability system be well integrated with school improvement. It is the data from the accountability system that we use to identify comprehensive support and improvement, targeted support and improvement, and now what we have an additional category called additional targeted support and improvement. And then our what was formerly State's turnaround is now State Springboard and Elevate. So we have both a federal school improvement system and a state improvement system as well. This is a visual representation of how the indicators are weighted within the accountability system. Proficiency and growth are the most, take up the largest portion of the accountability system. You can see that for high schools, for elementary, middle schools, it's about 2/3. For high schools, it's half. And then the other indicators alongside it. For high school, we add in the high school graduation, ACT, and advanced coursework. These come from the Accountability Technical Manual, which I'm going to talk about next. So most of your questions can be answered in the Accountability Technical Manual. I apologize. I think I did something. The Accountability Technical Manual is was just published for 2023-2024. Changes to the accountability system that I mentioned that were approved in our ESSA amendment were that overall letter grades will no longer be assigned to schools. There was a bill that was passed in the last legislative session that removed the requirement for assigning overall letter grades. So being an A school or a C school or an F school is no longer part of our accountability system and not a practice that we will that we are required to do any longer, which I think is a good thing for accountability systems. Accountability systems should be a flashlight and not a hammer. And when you put a letter grade on the report, it tended to be the main focus rather than the information actually presented on the school report card. Our growth calculation, we made a slight adjustment to how growth is calculated to use student growth percentiles only. That's kind of a technical fact, but just know that we've removed a layer of complexity, and the growth indicator is now one step simpler. A really important change, and one that we're really proud of, is the change to the exit criteria for English learners. Students previously were required to get a 5.0 overall composite on the WIDA access to exit EL status. We have changed that now to be an overall composite of 4.2 with a minimum speaking score of 3.5. So it's a two-prong exit criteria. They have to meet both in the same year. They can't meet one in 1 year and then the other in another year, and you combine. We are not banking scores in that way, so they do need to be in the same year, and that helps us know that students can enter they can be released from English Language Development Services and be successful in school in the general classroom. Of course, they are in monitoring for 4 years, and that support continues, but direct services can discontinue if they meet the new exit criteria. We changed identification and exit criteria for CSI and TSI. As I mentioned, those are comprehensive and targeted school improvement. And there are some good changes to assessment participation codes. You've heard reference to participation codes in many other presentations today. The Accountability Technical Manual is the place where you can find the definition, how they are included in
in accountability and when they should be assigned to students. So let's take a look. I have a QR code here that will take you to the Accountability Technical Manual. If someone's able to grab a link to post in the chat, that would be very helpful. Then you could look at it on your computer. But I'm just going to cover some high-level points in the technical manual as you're pulling this up, and then I'm going to give you some time as a team to look through it and answer some questions. So accountability systems that are well designed have a theory of action. Ours includes things like avoiding unintended consequences, promoting equity, and when we have questions about rostering sometimes, or how to make changes and adjustments, or how to make decisions about the accountability system, we really rely on our theory of action as those checks about, is this the right decision to make? And so our theory of action is in the technical manual. All of the indicator methodology is in the technical manual. So that is, how do we actually calculate achievement and growth? How do we calculate the lowest quartile growth? How do we, how is the fifth year graduating cohort included in the graduation cohort, in the graduation indicator? So lots and lots of very technical information about the methodology. There's a little bit of information about school improvement. Most of that is housed with documents that were created by our Center for Continuous School Improvement. And so we work together to make these documents work well together. And then Appendix A, as I mentioned, participation codes are listed in Appendix A. I imagine this is probably one of the more referenced parts of the manual, and we rely on it ourselves. Self-reported indicators are something that not all schools know about, but we have built a mechanism for schools to go into the data gateway and enter their own indicators, their own locally selected indicators that will appear on the school report card and be public to the parents and the community that are a part of your school. And I love when I see these indicators, and there's a really good appendix as well as instructions for how to enter those indicators, but gives examples, provides a template for how to enter those. Student growth percentiles is one of the more complex methodologies that we use to calculate growth. And Appendix D is a very helpful resource because it's a very easy to understand, and I've tried to avoid jargon in explaining just what student growth percentiles are. And then in Appendix F, we have EL progress case examples, because the calculation for EL progress is also quite complex. It provides, I think, 7 different scenarios for you to look at to understand how student EL progress is counted in the accountability system. So I'm going to give you some time. I think we said 5 minutes to browse the technical manual with your team. Think about, maybe you found something new, something you already use that is useful that you could share with your team. What you reference the most if this is a document that you rely on, and then what questions do you have? So we're going to go into breakout rooms, and you can just spend some time in the accountability technical manual, familiarizing yourself with its contents. Okay, we ready?
Yep, we have like less than 2 minutes. So
Great. So I think that's the end of my section, Kim.
Yep, it is. Just so you know, we told you we'd give you some time at the end. We ran just a little bit longer than we had planned on doing it. But if you are worried about your Midas credit, if you registered in Midas, we have one of the things you'll want to check is the email address that you used to register in Midas, because many of you still are using emails like your home personal email, which is fine, but we don't know who we can't tell, like with the information you're going to get is going to go to that email, not to your schools. So one of the things you may want to do is double check your Midas accounts to make sure that your email is correct. If you couldn't register in Midas, you need to go ahead and you should be able to register in Midas by going to Midas and registering. We can't register for you for that. And if you're some of the people who joined the meeting and never registered, and you've been there the whole time, one of the things you're going to need to do is jump onto the chat or send an email to Emily or me to let us know that you were there. And we're going to go on the honor system that you were actually there because you're here at the end. So I'm going to type my email in the chat. And Emily's email in the chat. And she is the person that will be reviewing all of the data. I didn't put .gov on my email. Sorry about that. And so that we are ready to go. But one of the things that you want to think about is the key details that you're going to use most often today. How has communication about assessment related topics improved? What procedures are you guys going to review or update because of some of the participation in this webinar? And any challenges that you may face as you work to build better connections. That's the main thing we want to leave you with today, is that the purpose of this was really to build more connection within your LEA about these topics. And like we said, we will be posting the recording and sending the PowerPoints out within the next day or two. So thank you so much for your attendance. Let me just finish typing my whole actual email address in. I can't talk and type at the same time most of the time. So there we go. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes. I can stay on until about 12:30. So if anybody has questions, feel free to pop into the chat, and we're welcome to go ahead and we can answer anything that you need. Remember, if you need access to your data gateway accounts, or if anything else with data gateway isn't working, you have to reach out to the data and statistics team. And I did type in the chat the link to that. So we only need to email for credit if we are not registered. Jessica, you are registered because I saw your name on the registration because I helped going through registration. So Jessica Bench, yes, you are. So if you're registered, you don't need to worry. If you got the email link that told you how to join this meeting, you are probably registered. So remember that is the way to tell. We're more concerned about the people who weren't there. Denise, I think you are. If you're not, you can go ahead and, just typing in the chat. If you're not sure, say, I'm not sure, type it in the chat really quick and we'll check it. So, and Michelle Laraway, and Michelle just typed that the growth data is already available in the data gateway. So if you're not sure that you're registered, just type your name in the chat with your first and last name and the school so that we're aware, which district or school you're at, so we can make sure we'll review that registration. We want to make sure everybody gets their credit for this long 4-hour meeting. So. Oh, good question. The purpose of Tableau is the way that they're demonstrating data, Janelle. I'm going to let Anne Michelle answer that more because she's more familiar with it from the data and statistics side, but that is the purpose of it. So go ahead, Anne Michelle. You want to answer that about Tableau?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Tableau is a data visualization tool, and it allows us to create tools that show data visually, but allow you to filter and select. So if you want to look at specific student groups within your school or your LEA, if you want to look at special ed students or any race, ethnicity category, a certain grade band, Tableau is very, very fun. I would encourage you to explore. It is a bit daunting at first. Don't let yourself be intimidated because it will provide you with some very valuable tools. And there are guides from our data and statistics team to help you learn to navigate. I believe, I don't want to say the URL wrong off the top of my head. When you get access to Tableau, there's a folder called LEA folders, and that is where you're going to be able to find probably the most useful tools for you. But there are a few Tableau reports that you can access directly from the data gateway. You could tell because they look very different. They say Tableau at the top, but and that might be a good entry point, but there's a very rich data set available to you in the Tableau server.
And thank you to everybody. So to get access to a contact, yes, you have to contact Data and Statistics. They are the ones that handle all of that. Janelle, great question. I'll scroll up and get the link again for you. Data and Statistics is also listed on when you go into the USBE website. It's one of the departments. It's listed right there on the main web page. So. Thanks, Lainez. Those of you who are typing in, that's really awesome. It's so nice that they go in and do things. Let's see. Reagan's asking, parents and students don't access. What I'm asking, is there ever a way for parents and teachers to see those on a student level? Teachers can see student growth. Reagan, if they have access to the data gateway.
So yes. So again, the same rules apply that were mentioned earlier about our minimum end size. That means a student group has to be of a certain size in order for us to publish the data to protect student privacy. So there is no information through the data gateway or the school report card at the student level, because we protect student privacy by defining this minimum end size so that nobody can, reverse engineer the data to pinpoint which student, did what. But schools have, of course, access to their own data, and we provide roster level data, meaning like student level data, to you through Tableau. Tableau, I think, is what, if you were familiar with surf files, the Tableau reports have replaced the surf files, is my understanding. And student level data is available to LEAs and schools through that server. But publicly, we keep that pretty protected because we don't want, we have an obligation to protect any personally identifiable information.
Okay, thanks everybody.